Yeah, good morning, Sairam.
Good morning, sir.
How are you doing?
I'm fine, sir.
Good to know that. Let's get started right away. I had given you some homework,
Yes, sir.
exercise from NCRT, examples 11.1 to 11.3. On top of that, exercise 11.1 to 11.11. Have you been able to try them?
Except excess first and fifth question others have done, sir.
So you have two questions that are your doubts 11.1 and 11.5.
Yes, sir.
Sure. I'll open my book now. Find the maximum frequency and minimum wavelength of X-rays produced by 30 kilovolt electrons. Easy question. So they're asking the maximum frequency and minimum wavelength. Oh, this is an X-rays question actually. So, but yeah, we'll talk about X-rays at the end of the chapter. Nevertheless, I'll tell you now itself how X-rays are produced. See, actually, there are two forms of X-rays, two ways of producing X-rays. One is a continuous X-ray, and second one is characteristic X-ray. So continuous X-rays are very easy to understand how they are produced. Basically, what you do is you take an electron gun. An electron gun is basically a filament with a high voltage battery that is connected via a variable resistor to basically a filament. So if you remember in the beginning, I told you three types of electron emission. Can you name them?
Thermoionic.
Yeah, that's the one we are talking about. So this is the thermoionic emission, where you heat the element so much that electrons will come out. For example, in an incandescent light bulb that we no longer use because it is not efficient, only 1% energy gives you light, the rest is heat. But nevertheless, I think who invented the light bulb? Was it Faraday or Tesla? It was Nikola Tesla who invented the light bulb, and that was an incandescent light bulb. Anyway, the point is when you heat the filament of an incandescent light bulb, it emits light energy. If you heat the filament of this electron gun, it is calibrated in such a manner, made of such a material that it will emit electrons upon heating. The moment the electron jumps out by absorbing heat energy via thermoionic electron emission, you will have a high tension battery here. This is actually a low tension battery, not that high voltage, high enough for thermoionic emission and nothing more. This is a high tension battery. The job of the high tension battery is to create a high voltage across these two junctures, which leads to, now this is very positive, this is very negative. There is an electric field in this region from the positive to the negative side. This electric field leads to the acceleration of the electron. I think I didn't draw it correctly. Pardon me for that. We have a high voltage here, negative to positive, very high voltage actually, positive, positive. Now electron is being attracted because the electric field goes from positive to negative. So the electron is being attracted towards this tiny slit. I can draw it a little bit upwards just to make it more sensible to you. Just a second. This is the one, I guess. Negative, negative. Okay. So this is the scenario. So this electron is going to get accelerated, go through this slit, and it will strike a material. You can say a metal like lead, metal slab, target metal, or metal target. The moment the electron strikes the metal target, it loses all of its energy. Just like that. This is some phenomena that you haven't yet understood or heard about. When the electron strikes the metal target, it loses its kinetic energy, which is converted to, I mean, it loses it and it goes as, first of all, heat. So it is heating the metal target. You do have some cooling system for the metal target, otherwise the metal probably gonna melt. Convert it to heat and electromagnetic radiation, which is basically just invisible light, high frequency radiation, which is above visible. Above visible, we have ultraviolet. After violet, we have ultraviolet, and then we have X-rays. So X-rays are two types: hard X-rays, soft X-rays. Soft X-rays are slightly less energetic than hard X-rays, which have more frequency and more energy. Converted to heat and electromagnetic radiation called X-rays. X-rays are basically electromagnetic radiation with a wavelength of around 1 angstrom. Okay, so 1 angstrom is how much you know? 1 angstrom is 10 to the power minus 10 meters. That is 0.1 nanometer or 100 picometer. Now, this is based on, like, you might ask, why does it happen? Because you do have a curiosity inside you, so I can explain that also. By the theory of electromagnetic radiation, and that is as far as we'll go, by the theory, and we'll study this in atoms also to explain how the Bohr's model is better than the Rutherford's model of atom. By the theory of electromagnetic radiation, like we are talking about why the electron is losing energy in the form of X-rays also, apart from just heat. By the theory of electromagnetic radiation, when a charged particle is accelerated, whether increase or decrease its energy, kinetic energy or speed, or even change its direction. You know what acceleration means, I don't have to tell you, is accelerated. It emits electromagnetic radiation. So it loses energy also, of course, because of conservation of energy, which is applicable here. And this is the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Okay, so you can note all this down. I hope you understood this part. This is the part of continuous X-rays. I'll talk about characteristic X-rays in a second once you're done with this.
Is I completed, but like in cyclotron, does it mean like it emits the radiation also at the same time?
What happens in a cyclotron? Cyclotron, you basically, no, in cyclotron, you apply electric field to increase the kinetic energy of the electron. And then it goes around in a circle in a magnetic field. So yeah, the electron is emitted, but it does not really lose energy. So that must be an exceptional case where the magnetic field is causing the charged particle to go in a circle, which means it is undergoing centripetal acceleration. So it should emit radiation. But nowhere is it written that in a cyclotron, the charged particle loses energy. My best guess would be that it loses energy, but it is very insignificant. Because here we are talking about microscopic level. You know, there it is macroscopic. A cyclotron is several meters large. The Large Hadron Collider is several kilometers in diameter. So there the energies are so high that maybe, just maybe, the acceleration would not cause a sufficient dent on the kinetic energy, so we don't talk about it. Maybe when we do proper theoretical physics in college or later as researchers or as experimental scientists, you, for example, not me. So if you get there, maybe they'll tell you, sir, there is some error here because like that. So then you'll understand, okay, like that. So, you know, not the whole truth will be given to you at any juncture. You have to keep unraveling as required as far as physics is concerned. Okay.
Yes,
So you can draw the diagram and note this down. Thank you.
is I completed?
You finished? Okay. Now I can talk about a very important and interesting phenomena called characteristic X-rays. So characteristic X-rays, how they work is basically if I draw the intensity versus wavelength diagram. Intensity versus wavelength diagram. 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. Okay. So what happens in that case is simply what we can understand is, one second. There is this continuous curve that you can see very easily with your eyes. But then there are these spikes. This is a spike. This is a spike. Okay. These spikes are basically characteristic X-rays, or maybe they are denoting characteristic X-rays. Okay. So I think it's called K alpha or something, but I'll tell you in a second what they are called when I recall. So what happens is that X-rays, there is a cutoff wavelength. I mean, when you're using a particular sample, the highest kinetic energy that an electron can gain is based on the potential difference that you have applied in the high tension battery. Because if the electron doesn't have more than, let's say, 100 electron volts of energy, by using a 100-volt battery, you are giving it 100 electron volts kinetic energy. Then your X-ray cannot be, the X-ray photon, for example, cannot be higher than 100 electron volts. Do you follow that part? Because if you don't have 100 electron volts in the electron, then it's not going to lose more than 100 electron volts. You know, it's not like it has a credit card or something that it can give you more than what it has, you know. So that's where this example comes in. So I'm going to quickly refer to the example and ask you to solve it. What they are saying is, I'll just write an equation and it will be crystal clear to you, the whole picture now. They are asking, find the frequency, minimum frequency, maximum wavelength of X-rays produced by 30 kilovolt electrons Okay, maximum frequency, minimum wavelength. So 30 kilovolt electron means energy of electron, that is the kinetic energy of electron K, is equal to 30 kilovolts, 30 kilo electron volts. Why? I'll tell you. I'll write it like this. Let's say that kinetic energy is equal to charge into voltage. Okay, so if you are accelerating a charged particle across a particular voltage V, let's say this is whatever, higher, lower, doesn't matter. And then here the kinetic energy is 0. When it reaches the other side, here the voltage is V, here the voltage is 0, V equal to V naught, let's say, here V equal to 0. Here kinetic energy is 0, potential is maximum. Hence potential energy is equal to Q into V naught, charge into potential. Here kinetic energy is maximum, which is equal to what the initial potential energy was, QV naught, and potential energy becomes 0, potential becomes 0. So anyway, long story short, when you take an electron across V volts, you're going to have a kinetic energy of EV at the end. Exercise 11.1 question, K equal to EV naught. Now V naught is 30 kilovolt. So that will give you 30 kilo electron volts of energy. Okay, now this 30 kilovolt kilo electron volt energy can be totally converted to a photon if we are lucky, that is, or some of it goes as heat, some of it goes as electron, X-ray, sorry, photon, totally converted to photon, X-ray photon, yeah, X-ray photon or heat. So best case scenario, all of the kinetic energy, K max, okay, not K max. Therefore, H nu, that is the energy of the photon of the X-ray, is always less than or equal to the energy that is available to us, which is 30 kilo electron volt. Is that part clear?
Yes,
or
sir.
not? I mean, I did tell you a lot of stuff, but I mean, you can just cut it short. Long story short, the photon energy is going to be the lower than or equal to the electron's energy, because electron is the source of the photon's energy, essentially, in this case. So the maximum frequency, therefore, nu max is equal to 30 into 10 to the power 3 into 10 to the power into 1.6 into 10 to the power minus 19. The conversion factor from electron volt to joules upon Planck's constant 6.63 into 10 to the power minus 34, all in SI units. Solve it, you'll get nu max in meters. Sorry, frequency hai to hertz mein. Then lambda min is equal to c, that is the speed of light in vacuum, upon nu max, because you know that's how frequency and lambda are related. We are assuming that we are working in vacuum. X-rays, usually we work in vacuum only. Evacuated glass chambers is what we use for X-ray production and assimilation. Okay, so lambda min is c by nu max. C is simply 3 into 10 to the power 8, and nu max you will calculate up there, and that'll be it, my friend. That's basically a continuous X-ray for you, right there. The question. Do you think the question was simple or difficult?
I think it was simple.
But you didn't have background, so you didn't know. So I understand. So please calculate and tell me the answer. Then we'll move to 11.5. And then we'll continue our discussion upon.
Sir, even 11.2C and 11.4C.
First, you do the calculation.
Yes, sir.
And don't use a calculator for the calculation.
Yes, sir, I got the answer.
Good. What was the next question you were talking about?
11.2C.
Let me check. C. The work function of cesium metal is 2.14 electron volts. When light of frequency this much is incident on the metal surface, photo emission of electron occurs. What is the maximum speed of the emitted photoelectrons? Maximum speed half mv square. Okay, I'll just write down the equation for you. If you go by the Einstein's photoelectric equation, you will find that total energy available, h nu, is converted to kinetic, sorry, 1 second, yeah, is converted to kinetic energy of the maximum kinetic energy of the electrons that are emitted plus the work function. So that means the maximum kinetic energy that an electron can have is h nu minus phi. So you have h 6.63 into 10 to the power minus 34. Nu is 6 into 10 to the power 14 hertz minus work function 2.14 electron volts. You can convert that to joules. 1.6 into 10 to the power minus 19 is the conversion factor. Now that will give you the kinetic energy maximum of the electrons. You want to convert that, you want to find the speed. You know the formula for kinetic energy for at least a particle, you know, okay, which has mass. So the particle which has mass, i.e. electron in this case, half mv max square is equal to me electron mass. That is equal to this. I hope that is clear. What is the mass of electron, by the way? Mass of electron is 9.11 into 10 to the power minus 31 kg. All in SI units we are working for reasons you already know.
It's like a head calculation. I was writing at that.
Can you repeat yourself? It wasn't very clear.
Like I wasn't able to like calculate that like v square, like under root of that
That's not my problem.
value. Like
that is not
and
my
then
problem.
next is 11.4C.
Yeah. 11.4C. How fast does a hydrogen atom have to travel in order to have the same momentum as that of a photon? So that one comes later in the chapter, but let me tell you now that you're asking. The momentum of photon is given by, believe it or not, P equal to h by lambda. P equal to h by lambda is the momentum of photon. I hope that part is clear to you. P equal to h by lambda. And h is Planck's constant, lambda is wavelength in meters of the photon. In this case, you have to have the hydrogen atom travel this, let's call it P nu, or you can also call it PP if you want. That is the momentum of the photon. And the momentum of the hydrogen atom is simply mass of hydrogen atom into speed of hydrogen atom. So mass of hydrogen atom is 1.67 into 10 to the power minus 27 kg into V should be equal to Planck's constant by lambda. That will be your answer.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
11.5.
11.5. Let me check. The energy flux of sunlight. Energy flux means intensity. That is power per unit area is called energy flux. So you can see from the unit, you can guess what it means. Watt per meter square. What is the SI unit of power, which is joule per second and per meter square? So that they are taking the power, dividing it by the area. So power by area. Okay. So how many? So how many? That's called intensity, by the way. How many photons nearly per square meter are incident on Earth per second, assuming that photon? So this is an easy question. 1.5, that is. 1 second, I lost it. Let's see here. Yeah. So how many photons per square meter are incident on the Earth per second, assuming that the photons in the sunlight have an average wavelength of 550 nanometers. So energy of one photon, h nu, is equal to 6.64 into 10 to the power minus 34, 6.63, doesn't matter, into c by lambda, 3 into 10 to the power 8 by 550 into 10 to the power minus 9. This is essentially your photons energy. Then they're asking how many photons per square meter are incident on Earth per second. So how many photons are incident on Earth per second? How will you find? You already have how much is the intensity. Intensity I, that is the energy flux, is 1.388 into 10 to the power 3 watt per meter square. That is actually equal to, because they're also only asking how many photons per square meter per second. That's what they're asking. So they're already asking you the intensity only, but in terms of number of photons. So you say number of photons n into energy of each photon, which you will calculate in the above equation. And that will actually give you the number n, like how many photons you need to actually have that much energy falling on the Earth's surface. That is 1 meter square of the Earth's surface every second, right? So that's the thing here. I hope I'm clear.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Are we done with the doubts?
Yes, sir.
You can calculate and tell me the answer to this. Then we'll continue. Are we done?
Yes, sir.
Wonderful. Let's go to characteristic X-rays and then we'll probably end this for today. So I was talking about characteristic X-rays. This is the graph that we really should be focusing on, where you can see that there are a couple of peaks. There can be more than two, but I just showed you two peaks. There can be multiple, to be very precise. So the only thing is, you must understand is that why it happens, this kind of behavior, because I mean, we haven't really discussed why exactly. One second. Yeah, so as I was saying, I'm just gathering my data. Yeah, I have it. So how it happens or why it happens is, it's very simple actually. If you take a look into how the other type of X-ray might be produced, is you can think of the atomic structure, which you are slightly aware of. I'm sure we haven't studied the chapter atoms yet, but I'm sure you're aware that there is a K shell and an L shell, which you might have studied in chemistry. I'm 100% certain. The K shell and the L shell are basically the first and the second orbitals of the atom. You can also call it orbit, but orbital is a better name. And then you have the nucleus in the center. So what's going to happen is, you'll have a couple of electrons roaming around the nucleus like this. And then you have 2 and then 8 electrons at the top, I think, if I'm not wrong. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 electrons in the second orbital. That is, the K shell has 2 electrons and the L shell has 8 electrons in it. Now, important part, when the high speed electron, which is not part of the atom yet, comes and strikes the rogue electron from outside with a high energy, comes and strikes the atom, it is able to penetrate through the orbitals because there is nothing to stop it really. And then it may strike an electron, very chance phenomena. But you know, electron is a wave, so it's not like concentrated at a single location. The electron is everywhere as a wave. So if we don't go too much into quantum mechanics, by chance, the electron from outside strikes the electron inside and knocks out both of them. This electron is knocked out of the park, like in cricket or baseball. It's gone out of the stadium, that is the atom. And the electron that did that is also out of the park. Anyway, it's not going to stay there for reasons I don't understand. But both of them go away. It's just a chance phenomena. So by chance, both the electrons are now out, and there is a empty location, a hole basically, like we studied in semiconductors. There is an empty position in the K shell now, which can be occupied by an electron from the L shell. Okay, so that's the logic that we'll apply. Why will it occupy the electron from the L shell? Why will it want to occupy a K shell electron, K shell position? Because K shell is more stable. As you know, electrons and atoms try to be more stable unless disturbed otherwise. So that's the rule of thumb in nature. A system which is left undisturbed sort of goes to more stability unless you pump it with energy and whatnot. So don't be stable, be unstable. until you get your goal, which will be never actually. So there you go. So there is a hole here and there's an electron here. There are 8 electrons, 1, 2, Ashtam, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Just like Ganpati Bappa is Ashtavinayak. Similarly, we have 8 electrons in the, never mind the religion, but electron goes to the empty shell. Any one electron can go from the L shell to the K shell. And while it does that, it will be emitting radiation because the energy difference between the two shells comes out as h nu, a photon radiation. This photon happens to be this particular wavelength, the smallest wavelength, because energy difference between the K and the L shell is the largest. Then we have between L and M, then M and N, like that. So highest energy difference between K and L shell, we call it K alpha. If somebody from the, so this is K alpha for you, K alpha line. If somebody comes from the M shell, for example, and they want to occupy, then it is going to emit a photon with a different wavelength or frequency, h nu dash you can call it, and that is basically K beta, like that. Okay, so K alpha, K beta, or it is possible that you knock out the electron. Now I'm going to just draw it roughly now that you've understood. You knock out the electron, you leave the L shell, K shell alone, and you knock out an electron in the L shell, and somebody from the M shell wants to occupy. Now nobody can come from the K shell because you're not gonna like have more energy going into the electron and then that goes up. That's not happening. So spontaneously, if you want a process, then energy should reduce. So h nu double dash. This is basically, which line are we talking about? L alpha. So that's the nomenclature. K alpha. If the electron goes to K shell, it will be K line, and then alpha beta depends on how far away from the electron is coming. So it comes from either the L shell, then it's alpha. It comes from M shell, beta, N shell, gamma, K, L, M, N, O, O shell, delta. Like that, it might work. But usually we just talk about alphas and betas because they are the main contributors to the intensity. It is highly unlikely for other stuff to happen. Not that it doesn't happen, but it is statistically insignificant for our graph. It is not necessary because we are trying to learn it in rough manner. So we're not going into much detail as to how the variations on the graph will look, because the scale can vary tremendously. Hundreds of thousands and millions of factors difference can be there when we talk about statistics. There is no limit to what a factorial difference can be between a probable event and an improbable event. You could have a billionth or a trillionth or a gazillionth, or I don't know. I mean, a very likely event and a very unlikely event can be very far apart in the universe in terms of the probability, the numerical probability. So when you scale it on a graph which is drawn to scale and not a logarithmic chart or anything, in that kind of scale, the peak due to the unprobable event is so small that it will be a mere perturbation on the graph. You will not be able to see it properly with the naked eye or even with a software unless you have a high precision equipment, which is costly. So anyway, I'm digressing here. Main thing is you cannot see the lines beyond the K alpha and K beta usually by normal equipment, unless you calibrate and use that kind of equipment, which only if necessary those kind of resources are allocated to that kind of research. That's the kind of thing. But you can always theorize. In theoretical physics, there is no resource required. If you're a theoretical physicist, you can just ponder away and write something and get paid without doing any experiment or getting research grants, for example. Of course, you will have to verify properly with a research experiment to back it, and then people will really listen to you. So that's when experimental physics sort of complements theoretical physics But theoretical physics is more powerful because you can't do experiments on everything. That's why theoretical physics is more powerful, because even though people will question you that show it in a lab, will you? And then you will need to get the resources, the funding, okay, which is not easy at all. So theoretical physics, my friend, or abstract mathematics. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is that you can have K alpha, L alpha. You can also have M alpha. Now you are free to wonder how M alpha will happen. It will happen when M shell electron goes to L shell, and that is M alpha. What is M beta? When M shell electron goes to L, K, L, M. Yeah, M goes to L, that is M alpha. Sorry, N goes to M, which is M alpha, and then N goes to L, that is M beta, and that is lastly N goes to K, that is M gamma. Okay, so the thing is, here I'm just writing, you can see that the wavelength is lower for K alpha because the energy difference is larger. For K beta, the energy difference is lower, so wavelength is higher. The intensity is higher for K alpha because it is more probable, and the intensity is lower for K beta because it is less probable. So probability is directly proportional to intensity, essentially your peak height, how high your peak is. And your wavelength is inversely proportional to the energy difference. That's all I need to tell you for this one. So that's your characteristic waves, X-rays, and your continuous X-rays. I will see you tomorrow, probably same time. I mean, I wake up and basically I message you at 8 o'clock. So whenever you're ready, I'll be ready. We'll have the class tomorrow. Yeah?
Yes, sir.
Are we good to go now? So you
Yes.
want any homework, you can actually try more X-ray questions. You can start trying from NEET book, because we have already done now X-rays and photoelectric effect. So a couple of things left, wave nature of electron. Also, I told you H by P, the formula for lambda, but I'll explain that in more detail. You can leave the wave nature questions and the Davison-Germer experiment questions, and rest you can start trying from the NEET book, and you can ask me doubts tomorrow. But before the doubts, I mean, I'm not sure, you should remind me or I should write it down that we have to understand dual nature tomorrow. Wave nature of matter, that is. That's the goal of tomorrow's class. Firstly, because if I don't do the theory and then we discuss all the questions like we did today, mostly apart from the X-rays part, yeah, then you won't have any material for homework. That's the problem. Okay, so I'll see you
Yes, sir.
tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.